Ada Woodson-Adams, and today is the 15th of July, 2006. I'm interviewing
Helen Stevens-Ransom.
and we're at the Holiday Inn in Zanesville, Ohio, and we're doing this for the African American Presence in the Ohio River Valley Oral History Project. Good afternoon or good evening, Helen. How are you doing this evening?
Just fine, thank you.
It's good to see somebody that I know, and so, but even though I know you and we grew up in the same town, I want you to pretend that I don't know you and I don't know your family. And so if you will, when you talk about your grandpa or somebody, if you give them a name.
Okay.
For me, okay? Helen, where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Nelsonville, Ohio. I grew up in Meigs County in the southern part of the state.
When did you leave Nelsonville?
When I was 3 years old.
Okay.
I'm sorry, 3 months old.
3 months, okay.
Yes.
They carried you out of Nelsonville, did they?
Yes, they did.
Okay. Did your parents ever tell you why you left Nelsonville for Meigs County?
Well, my father was from there, and he was working temporarily in Nelsonville when I was born.
Okay. I'm going to go back a little bit and just ask you to name your parents for me.
Okay, that would be Fremont Stevens and Alta Marie Harper.
Okay. And where was Fremont born?
He was born in 1900 in Meigs County, Ohio.
Okay. And Alta?
She was born in Athens County or in Nelsonville, Ohio.
Okay. What year do you know?
Mother was born 1905.
And how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I did have 3 brothers, 2 older and 1 younger.
And what were your brothers' names and dates of birth?
Oh, David was the eldest, and he was born in 1925. Raymond was the second son, and he was born in 1927, I believe. And I was born in 1935, and my younger brother was born in 1937, I believe.
And so, your father, what kind of work was he doing in Nelsonville?
He was working at the brickyard there.
Okay. And when he went back to Meigs County, what city did you live in?
We lived near a place called Langsville, Ohio. It's just a little small place that had a couple stores and a post office. But we lived on a farm, and he farmed, and he was the person that helped to build the roads and grade the roads down there. He was an elected official in Salem Township.
Okay. Did you spend all your life there on the farm?
Yes, I grew up down there and graduated from there.
What school did you go to?
I went to Rutland High School.
Okay. Did your brothers go to that school also?
Yes, they did, all 3.
Okay. What was school like for you?
Very different because I was the only black or colored or whatever in my class.
And how many were in your class approximately?
It was 36, I believe, graduated.
Were there any other persons of color in the school?
I would say about 5, that's all.
5, and 3 of them
Yes.
being your family.
Yes.
Okay. What were the teachers? How did the teachers treat you?
Well, they treated me real good. I tried to maintain good grades, which my parents insisted on, and that day you did the best you could. And but the teachers and I got along just fine.
Okay. How about with the other kids in the class?
We were always, I never had any problems.
No name calling or anything like that?
When I was in grade school, yes. I went through that for a period of time, but they used to tease my little brother, and that would make me angry, but there was some. And of course, I fought back. And
I was going to ask, what did you do when you got angry?
well, the teacher would make us sit on the front row in the little 2-room schoolhouse and threaten to spank us, but I never got it.
All right. When your father went back to Meigs County to take up farming, was there a reason why he decided to do that?
Well, we lived on the Norman farm there, and then we moved to the home place, which was the Stevens home place that was originally the Rumfield place. So,
Okay. Now, you mentioned the name Norman. Were they related to you, the Normans?
yes, Henry Sherman Norman was married to my grandfather's sister.
And your grandfather's sister's name was?
Was Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Harper.
Okay. Now, the Harper name is a popular name. I can't think of the word I want to say, but a name that you find often in and around Athens County and Meigs County.
Yes, there was quite a few of the Harper family that came from the Virginia area, and they came to Ohio. They were all around the area, Belmont County and all that. Then a lot of them went then to northern Michigan, up in that area, and a lot of them still live there. And my grandparents remained in Nelsonville.
Okay, what were your grandparents' names?
That was David Harper, and he was married to Emma Morgan Harper.
Okay. When did the Harpers come out of Virginia into Ohio? Do you know?
I really don't know offhand. I know that my grandparents were married in about 1900 or 1901, and they were young then, and so it would have been actually their parents lived lived in Michigan, northern Michigan, and they moved back down to Ohio.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you tell me how the Harpers their family got to Michigan?
Well, it's said that they went there by ox cart and horse-drawn carriages.
Okay. Did they go with just themselves or with a group of people?
No, they went with a lot of they were some of the early settlers of northern Michigan, up in the Remus area.
Okay. And do you know why David chose not to leave Nelsonville?
I really don't know, but he was working in a coal mine there. He also used to haul coal up the Erie Canal.
How did he do that?
Well, you hauled them on barges, and they were pulled by mules.
Okay. Did you ever have an opportunity to speak with him about that?
Well, I've heard my mother talk about it more than grandfather, but part of the canal is still there. So every time I go by, it's interesting, to see where he actually was.
Did the Harper family come into Ohio with any other families when they migrated from Virginia?
Yes, they did. There were many families a lot of them are still in northern Michigan, and there was the Rice, the Greens, Myers, just a whole lot, and I am related to a lot of those families, the original families that went up there.
Did you ever hear about any Underground Railroad activity during any of your ancestors?
Yes. For where I lived, my great grandfather was a Indian guide to General Putnam, and he came from Massachusetts. His name was Ezekiel Gomer, and he came with General Putnam and stayed with him until Marietta was settled, and it was laid out. And then he gave him, I believe it was 670 acres in Meigs County. And I lived where I grew up. I could look up at the Gomer farm. His daughter was married. Her first husband was married to a Norman. He was in Andersonville prison during the Civil War, and he died there. Then she married my uncle. So my great-grandmother was a full-blooded Cherokee.
Okay. what was the guy's name that was in Anderson prison?
Henry Norman.
Henry Norman.
Yes.
He married a full-blooded Cherokee?
Yes.
Okay, and what was her name?
Her name, Sarah Gomer.
Okay.
That was the daughter of Ezekiel.
Okay.
He had 2 daughters, and both of them married Normans.
Okay. Tell me about your Native American heritage. When did you learn about it, and how did you react to it when you learned about it?
Well, when I was young, I didn't hear too much, but eventually my mother would tell me things, and I knew I had pictures. I have the original pictures of the Harpers, and the one Harper, his name was Yip Yellow Dog.
No. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And he changed his name. This is what my mother told me. He changed his name to John Gibson Harper. And he was a senior because he had a son we named John Gibson Jr.
Okay.
That was on my mother's father's side.
Okay.
Then on my mother's side, they were of another Indian tribe, and she was a Lett. Joanna Lett married Morgan, and she was, I can't remember.
That's okay. You said Joanna Lett was an Indian?
Joanna Lett, yes. She was born a Lett, and she was Indian, yes.
Okay. I happen to have seen the name Yellow Dog in some census in Nelsonville, Ohio. So that would have been John Gibson?
John Gibson Sr., yes.
Okay. He was the only Native American person that I ever saw listed in Athens County.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, his parents, when my mother had told me that when you went to their house, it was a teepee up in Remus, Michigan, and it was pretty well wooded at that time, and they lived in a teepee, and they had a lean-to for a kitchen, and they covered the trail to the house to where they lived because it was difficult to find. Nobody could hardly find it. That's when she was a little girl.
Wow, your mother remembered that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And Yellow Dog was married at the time, I believe. Do you know who his wife might have been? It's back in the 1800s. So.
Yes, I should remember, but I don't remember.
Okay. So when did your families celebrate their Native American culture?
No.
Do you know why they didn't?
My father was Cherokee too, Cherokee and German, and I started researching about 14 years ago, and I uncovered all this. And then there was a book that has the pictures that I have the originals of, and they're my grandparents and great-grandparents and so forth.
Wow, okay. Are you going to do anything with that information? Are you going to turn it into a book for future generations?
Well, I have cousins that have already done that. And they've come down to my generation, and then hopefully we will go to my children and so forth.
I'm going to ask you one more time your father's name again.
Fremont Howard Stevens.
Okay. And I don't think I asked you where he was born.
He was born down at Langsville, Ohio. But his parents lived up in the Belmont area, up in Washington County, and there's where his father is buried.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is, how did you feel and your family they felt about your the culture other than the Native American culture? Did they talk much about your ethnic background and how they were embracing that particular ethnic?
It was never discussed.
Never discussed.
Never in the house, no.
Okay. Even when you found out about your Native American, they didn't?
No, because that's actually after my parents died that I really, especially my father after he passed away, that I actually found out about the Native American part.
Okay. Can I just letting us know, I keep my questions more shorter too.
No, their questions are good.
Okay. Being that your father was born in Linesville, Ohio, Meigs County, have you heard of a place called Poke Patch?
My father was born in Langsville, Ohio, and not too far from there, within about a radius of 12 miles, was a place called Poke Patch.
Do you know why it was called Poke Patch?
Some of the early slaves and free people of freedom did live there. There were several of those places down there in that area, and they still have the same names. Gallipolis, Poke Patch, in that area. Of course, Gallipolis was settled by the French, and it's still a French city. But there were several communities around there that were filled with Negro people.
Mm-hmm. Do you know why they happened to settle there and not keep on coming north if they were?
The people settled there because they were welcome in that area. And they had people there to help them out and that type of thing. And there was an underground railroad there.
Can you tell me about that?
Okay, it was in my great-grandfather's home. And it's a big house that still stands on the hill, and the Underground Railroad is there. They hid slaves as they came across into Gallipolis or Pomeroy from West Virginia. And the house, you would go, they had a basement in it, and when you went off the big porch or veranda on the outside, you would go down to the basement, which was made of thick blocks. I've only been down there once, but my dad would never tell me where the sliding door was. It's still there, and the owner now, who is a cousin and still a Gomer, he knows where it is.
Does he open it up to the public?
No.
Mm-hmm.
No one knows but the one remaining son now.
I won't ask you where I was going to ask you, it stands on a hill where?
It stands on a hill in, the house is in Salem Township, Meigs County, and there's a road that goes from Gallipolis up there. It's called the Fremont Stevens Road, which is named after my father. And it is Briar Ridge Road.
Okay.
And that's where the Wilmer Cemetery is too.
How many, I'm going to get back to the cemetery, but on the Underground Railroad, do you remember any other stories?
No, that's the only thing that I've ever heard is just that people did go there. I don't know how many. Another thing that they did have there was a large smokehouse was cut out of one log, and they smoked a lot of wild meat and hogs and all kinds of meat. And that smokehouse, the tale now that goes around is that they hid slaves in there too. Now that smokehouse, I've seen it all my life, and now it's in Columbus, Ohio, in the Historical Society. It was taken there, I don't know, 10 or so years ago.
Okay, that's very significant. The cemetery that is the Wilmer Cemetery, tell me something about that.
Well, the Gomer Cemetery is all of the people in the Gomer family and the corresponding families like the Armstrongs. A lot of my original ancestors are buried there. Not only Gomers, but Normans and the people that lived in that area. And it's well maintained by the area commissioners.
Mm-hmm. The name Gomer is unusual. Can you tell me how?
Gomers came, like I said, from Massachusetts. And I don't know. They were Cherokee. This is the only thing I know about them.
Mm-hmm. The Armstrongs and the Normans, do you know where they came from?
The Normans came from Massachusetts, and I can't think offhand what their affiliation is with the Native Americans, but they were definitely from Massachusetts, and the Gomers came from that area also.
Uh, Did you ever play around this particular house that was the site of the Underground Railroad, the house on Fremont Stevens Road?
Okay, now the house up there is interesting. I was only in the, where the Underground Railroad was. I was in the basement one time, and I don't think I was supposed to be down there, but I was a kid. But it was a big house, and some of the Gomer girls were, we'd go in the back room. They had a parlor. They had all these different rooms. It was just exciting to a kid. And upstairs, they had the old spinning wheel and the three-wheeled bike, and that was interesting.
Oh, how old were your grandfather when he died? The Gomer.
Gomer, well, I didn't know him. I didn't know Grandpa Gomer either. But I knew his children and that type of thing. But I think he was in there in the 1700s. Whenever Marietta was settled, then he went there right afterwards.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear more about him serving with Putman as his guard.
Yeah, he was Ezekiel Gomer. There was two of them. The first one, I don't know what happened to. They said that he had 7 strapping sons, and I know that one of them was Ezekiel number 2. And he had a son who was married into the Johnson family, who lived next door down in Meigs County. And he had 2 daughters. Both of them, one married Hiram Norman, and the other married Henry Norman. And I grew up in the Henry Norman home in Meigs County.
Okay. How about Grandma Gomer?
I never got to see her. I have her picture from a tintype. But she was a very, I think, distinguished looking woman. And I would love to have known her. They said that she was so nice, but she died long before I was born.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other places in Meigs County that your family lived, not just your father, but extended family?
There were several different members of the family, of my father's siblings, that lived in Meigs County, but they went to Michigan also for racial reasons, really.
Mm-hmm. And when the families went to Michigan, do you know about what year that was?
You mean my uncles and aunt? They went. Oh, I was born in 1935, and I think they went. They lived up there ever since I could remember. When I was quite young, I suppose they went in about maybe 40 or something like that.
After you were born?
After I was born, they went to Michigan about that same time.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Nelsonville, Ohio, even though you left there at 3 months of age?
Yeah, 3 months, 3 weeks, something like. I was a baby, I know.
Okay.
I was born at my grandfather's place.
David Harper?
David Harper, yes.
Okay. Did you go back to visit?
Oh, yes. I went to Nelsonville quite frequently. It was about 65 miles from Meigs County where I lived. And Grandpa, if he didn't have cookies in the house, and they had to be ginger snaps, he'd take us down over the hill, and my little brother and we'd go down to a place called Jimmy Schaefer's, the bottom of the hill, and we'd get ginger snaps, and then we'd walk way up that hill again, and it was, your little legs would get so tired. But he was a wonderful person.
Yep. Do you remember the name of that hill?
Mason City Hill, that's what it was. They lived right up over what they call there's a big gully lake, and he planted his potatoes every February, I believe it was, in that gully, and that's where he raised his garden. And he had a spring that came out of the hill, and that's where they got their water.
Was it good water?
Oh, yes. I tell you, the water was so good, and we'd like to go out to the spring and get the drink right there. It was really nice.
What other things did you do when you would visit Grandpa?
Well, Grandpa had his own little shed, and we weren't allowed in it unless he went with us. And I don't remember what all he kept in there, but we'd go in exploring, and he'd always take us in there. It was really fun.
The thing in Nelsonville, they had a lot of coal mining. Do you know anybody in your family who were coal miners?
My grandfather, I don't know if he owned a coal mine or worked in a coal mine, but I know that he was affiliated with in some way. And I've been wanting to go down there and ride on that train, but I haven't made it yet. They have a train that goes up the holler, and I hope to get on there before too long.
Yes. What were some of your fondest memories of going to Nelsonville besides visiting with Grandma and Grandpa Harper?
Well, the only other thing, there was a teacher that lived toward the downtown area, and I can't remember her name, but we would go visit her each time that we would go. She was a very nice person. And also, we'd go up over the hill to Bookdoor, and the people that lived up on the hill, we were just all over the hillside.
Did you know any other families in Nelsonville besides the teacher you would go visit?
Well, I knew the Brown family, which the daughter eventually became my sister-in-law. That was Eunice Brown, and she married my older brother, David Stevens. Other than that, I knew the Hayden family, and also the one woman that lived at the bottom of the hills named Grace Lethbridge. And I knew her and her family, and we'd always go down, and Grandpa would, "Hi, Grace, how are you today?" You know, everybody knew Dave Harper. I don't know, everywhere he would go, if he found a marble, he'd pick it up. So I ended up with the jar of marbles, and my daughter has them now. All kinds of old marbles. And there's just so many things. It was in a blue jar that he'd had, so.
Did he play with the marbles, or did he allow you to play with them?
No, we didn't play with his marbles. We just looked at them, but I inherited them. Another thing that he had on his wall, they had on their wall, is an Indian head. And I remember it, then I know that Mother had it, and I have it now in my home down in Bidwell, Ohio.
Did you ever find out who the Indian head, who it was?
I have tried to check it out. It's very old. The Indian head's very old, but there's nothing on the back, no inscription or anything. I have an idea that it came from probably my great-grandparents. I think it's probably that old.
You get real excited when you talk about Nelsonville, so I can tell that you had some really wonderful times there. Are there any situations that you had in Nelsonville that weren't so happy?
Every time that I went to Grandma and Grandpa Harper's house, it was just a good thing. And I went there for my grandmother's funeral after I was in Columbus and married. And that was the only sad occasion that I can remember. And then my grandfather, after my grandmother, Dave Harper, died, or after his wife died, my grandmother, he went to live with my mother in Meigs County because he was quite old, and there's where he passed away.
Okay. And what was your mother's name again?
My mother we called her, her name was Alta Marie, but they called her Marie all the time.
Okay. The thing that I find interesting is they had coal mining in Nelsonville and the brick factory. Did most of the men have jobs other than brick factory or coal mining?
I don't know about the job situation. I know that my father worked in the just above Nelsonville in a little town or just a little brickyard place, and they had a round house made out of bricks, and it's still there as far as I know.
Did he
And
live in it?
No, he didn't live there. I don't know who did, but it was odd to see it because you just don't see little round houses everywhere.
That's true, that is true. Tell me about, after you were married, how many children do you have?
Well, I have one daughter, and I raised my grandson. My daughter's Diane Harris, and she lives in Columbus, and Sean lives up in that area also. And I have stepchildren. I have 3 stepchildren. My first husband, who passed away with massive heart attack, and my current husband, I've been married 8 years, and he has 2 sons. So we call them 7 children altogether, and we're all very happy with each other.
Wonderful. After you were married to your first husband, I heard you say you lived in Columbus?
Yeah, I lived in Columbus as soon as I got out of school. I got out of school at the age of 17, and I went to Columbus, and I worked for Nationwide Insurance, but I had gone to the depot, but I was too young to work for the government. So I went to Nationwide Insurance, and then when my daughter was born, I took a short leave of absence, and I went back to work for the government. So with the government, I put in 42 years, over 42 years. Then after I retired in 1969 or 96, I went to work for the state of Ohio. So finally I had to quit because of physical problems.
Did your brothers, did they stay in the area of Meigs County, or did they move on?
My oldest brother lived in Nelsonville. My middle brother went to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and my younger brother went to Canton, Ohio.
And your brothers' names are?
David, Raymond, Earl, and they're all deceased.
Okay. And your daughter's name?
My daughter is Diane English Harris.
Her first name is English?
No, that's her name.
Oh, okay.
Her married name is Harris.
Okay. Her first name is?
Diane,
Okay.
D-I-A-N-E.
Okay. You told me that.
Or D-I-A-N-N, it's different.
Are there anything in that, so far the things I've asked you, can you think of anything that we need to fill in like
I
lived or something?
I lived most of my time on the Norman homestead, and then I moved to my grandparents' house when it was empty after my grandparents died. And my grandfather, my dad's father, was killed in 1919 in a sand cave-in Washington County. Then my grandmother was widowed, and she raised the family. My father was the oldest of the boys. I believe there were 7 of them. Seven, yes, 7 of my aunts and uncles, yes.
The Norman family name keeps popping up, and there were Normans in Nelsonville. Did you know any of those? I want to hear about that.
Okay, he was in the 1770s, 1777 or something like that, and he was married to a Fortune Stevens, and I am a descendant of them. It comes clear down to, I ended up with a Henry Norman, and my father were cousins through the Gomer girls.
Can you repeat that start? I'm a descendant of Basil, Norman, and?
Fortune Stevens.
Can you just say I'm a descendant of?
Oh,
Basil?
I'm a descendant of Basil Norman and Fortune Stevens.
And Basil Norman was born about?
I believe Basil Norman was born in the 1700s sometime. I don't know just exactly when. I do have the information, but not with me today.
So did Basil Norman come into Ohio, and from where?
That's something that I really don't know. I don't know where he came from. Oh, he would have had probably come from Massachusetts, where all the Normans did originate.
Okay. Do you know where they moved to into Ohio? About what area Basil may have moved into Ohio?
I don't know. I think that Basil probably, I don't know what area of Ohio he was in, but I know there is a Norman homestead in Gallia County, where I live now, it's right outside of Gallipolis.
Okay. So the Normans had a homestead around Gallipolis, and they also had one where you first stayed.
Where I first stayed, it was called the Norman Place.
Okay.
And there's where several of the families had lived there. And my uncle, Henry Norman, had lived there.
Okay. Does the family still own that land?
No, that house is almost dilapidated now. And it was sold to a woman in Columbus named Stout and a woman named Steele. I believe it was Steele.
Okay. Do you know if any of your land is on Wayne National Forest lands?
I don't think that any of the land down there in Meigs County is national forest. I know a lot of it was Rumfield property. It was, and he gave, my great-grandfather was a Rumfield, and he left property to his two stepdaughters, who were Normans, and to his two children.
So, Rumfield. Now, that's another story.
Rumfield is another story.
That's what I want to hear.
I don't think he wanted on any place.
Pardon me?
Rumfields were German, and there are many of them living in that area down there.
And he was your great-grandfather,
Yes,
and he had two stepdaughters.
who were Normans,
So
yes.
tell me about the Rumfield property. Did your family own any of that property later on?
I did until just about 5 years ago, and I sold my portion. I was one of the remaining Rumfield descendants of that particular lineage. But there are many Rumfields
Okay.
in that area.
Did you celebrate your Rumfield heritage when you were growing up?
No, I didn't celebrate anything as far. I called them aunt and uncle, and I really didn't know why. But they really were my uncles and aunts.
And does anyone still own any of that property then that's related to your family?
The property has probably all been sold out in that area now to other families. They would have been Caucasian.
Okay. I'm going to take you back up north now. You
Okay,
heard Payne's Crossing,
yes.
and how does that associate with your family?
Payne's Crossing, I have found out that a lot of my ancestors are buried in that particular cemetery. The Harpers that are there are my ancestors, and I'm not sure how many others. I've been following it with newspaper articles, and also the Geological Society or something had some articles in the paper. They came down to what is called the Emancipation, and I was there, and I gave some information and whatever, and I've been following that. And in there are headstones of a lot of my ancestors that did not go to Michigan. They stayed in Belmont County, Washington County, And I also have Stevenses from that area, who were my father's people.
Okay. When the family came into Ohio, were they also given land?
No. The family purchased the land, I believe. I have seen some deeds, but not a great lot of them. But they are recorded in Pomeroy, Ohio. That's the county seat for Meigs County. But a lot of their records, they tell me, were destroyed in a fire.
The relatives that you had that are buried in Payne Cemetery, did they own land in that area?
The people that are buried in the Payne Cemetery and that other cemeteries out in that area, I don't know if they owned land out there, they were renting, they were farming. I don't know what they were doing, but I know that my grandfather was there, my dad's father, who was a Stevens, Edward Grant Stevens, and a lot of his brothers lived in that area also. And he was the one that was killed in he was in a ditch and the sand came down on him and he died there.
Are you related to any of the Paynes? Any Paynes?
Ooh. I have relatives that the Harpers were married to some of the Paynes in Black Fork and Oak Hill in that area.
Is there anything about the cemeteries down where you live now that you'd like to share with us about families, burials, and so forth?
I haven't. I have been to quite a few of the cemeteries. There's one on Dead Man's Curve out of Rutland, and it is really a terrible curve, and my parents are buried there, and the Clarks, who were Norman descents, who were half cousins to my father, they're buried there in that cemetery. It's a big cemetery. Also, they have other cemeteries in the area that some of them I do have people buried in.
Mm-hmm. Is that where most of your family members are buried, in the cemetery at Dead Man's Curve?
Yes. My family, they have large areas and they're walled and everything. They're very old graves. Are in the one between Langsville and Rutland, Ohio.
What's the name of that cemetery? Does it have a name or?
The cemetery has a name, but I can't call it right off.
Oak Hill?
No, that's out of Pomeroy.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What was no, let's go back. Is there any? Go ahead.
One other thing about cemeteries, they tell me that down there where I live, there are 7 generations of Stevenses buried in the one cemetery. And I haven't been there yet to check that out, but I do go to the different cemeteries as long as I can walk.
I'd like to have more information back about the Rumsfeld family and how it connects to the Normans and the Harpers. If that's a comfortable subject for you to share with us.
There is a connection with the family, but I really don't think I should talk about it.
Okay.
Of course, like I say, they were German, and he did marry the Gomer girl, but it was my grandmother.
And about what year was this?
Well, it was right after the Civil War, or during the Civil War. My grandfather now, he was German, and he was with the 7th Ohio Cavalry, and he lost a leg in that war.
That was Grandpa Rumsfeld?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And were they married before or after the Civil War?
I really don't know. When they got married, I know that her husband was in the prison. Grandma Rumfeld's husband was a Norman then, and he was in Andersonville prison, and he died there. Then sometime after that, they were married. And then when she died, he remarried. And I haven't solved that problem yet either.
Okay. Forgive me for being a little confused, but grandfather Rumfield was in Anderson prison?
No, grandmother Sarah Norman, Gomer Norman, husband died in Andersonville prison. He was also in the Civil War, and he was captured, and there's where he died.
Okay. Gomer Norman was married to Sarah. I'm going to confuse this whole tape.
Sarah Gomer's first husband was Henry Norman.
Okay.
He was the fellow that died in Andersonville prison.
Okay.
And then after he died, sometime after that, she was married to my grandfather, which was a Rumfield.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Well, now I'm clear. All right. What may be the saddest memory that you can remember in your childhood besides maybe the death of a family member? Is there anything else in your childhood that you can recall that was really sad?
I feel that I had a very happy childhood. We swam in the creek. We rode bicycles. I rode horses. I used to ride a horse racing over at Pomeroy at the county fair. And I was in 4-H club. I was active in 2 different groups. And one we did sewing and one we did cooking. And we didn't have a lot. We played games and things like that. And it was always my brothers and I. And sometimes the boys around the area would come over, but our nearest neighbor with kids was a long way off. They either had to walk or ride a bike or whatever, because we didn't even have electric then.
Did you have an outhouse?
Oh yes, we had 6 rooms and a path.
What's 6 rooms and a path?
We had a kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom downstairs, and upstairs we had 3 bedrooms and the path to the outhouse.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the Civil War. One of the Harpers served in the Civil War. Do you know who that might have been? And I don't know which one it might have been. And he lost an arm, and he lived in Nelsonville.
As far as I know, I only had one uncle that did have one arm missing, but he was not a Harper, and I don't know. I believe it was William Harper, and I think that he might have been a cousin to my grandfather or something. I don't know. I know there are several Harpers buried at Bookdale. It's right over the hill from Nelsonville.
Okay. All right. And then the other thing I want to talk about is organizations, the churches that your family may attend, or any other organizations that they might have belonged to.
Okay. We went to church at a little church called Wesley Chapel, and we walked or rode the horse or rode our bikes. At night we'd get out, and it was about 2 or 3 miles. And you learned every mud puddle on the way, because if you didn't, you would end up with mud all over you, but it would be moonlight out, and it would be nice. And you start out up home, and you just gathered each family as you went down. And we went to church on Sunday, and Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And my mother was a pianist, and she played the piano or organ different times that we had at church.
Who was the preacher?
Well, that particular church was Methodist, and we had different preachers. They be there a couple of years, but I remember when I graduated from school, I was given a white Bible by the minister, and I don't even remember his name, but it's been a long time ago.
Mhm. Still got the Bible?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
It's worn, but I have it zips up.
Yeah.
It's zipper clear around it.
Did your mother and father go to church too, or?
Mother and dad and my brothers and I. Well, the older boys were gone when I remember, but my younger brother and I, we always went to church.
Did you ever have any hate crimes, Ku Klux Klan or something like that in Pomeroy area?
There was one thing that used to bother me. I had the same music teacher for 12 years, starting with the first grade. I don't think she improved my voice at all, but they had, back in that time, they had minstrels in high school. And I sang in the chorus because I had to get my credit. But I never did the blackface thing. They still have them in Pomeroy to this day. They do. They have the professional people that do the minstrels.
It's amazing.
But other than that, there was not too much disturbance because there weren't many people of color that lived in that area.
Okay. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us that I haven't covered?
I can't think of too much that I haven't talked about.
Is there any more that you would like to tell us about your Native American heritage?
It's just that when I found out that I was quite a bit of Native American in me, I really became very interested in it. And I started research, and I can go back in some families, the 1700s. I've had help from a couple of cousins. One works for the IRS, and he writes books, and the other one was published in northern Michigan, and it's just helped me tremendously, really. I've found cousins that I didn't know, all nationalities, races, and everything. And I think it's just wonderful. I love it.
Yes, wonderful. Yeah.
How did you first find out that you were Native American?
I found out the first of it was my mother began to tell me, well, there was a cousin that came from Michigan that was looking for Marie Harper. And he found her. He knew her name was Stevens. He had married a girl from down in Meigs County. And mother were really good friends with this girl's grandmother. And so she found her in Columbus, and then finally I got to meet him. And he was Native American from Remus.
Okay. He was a Harper?
He was a Morgan.
Mm-hmm.
And that was on my grandmother's side. And when I found that out, she would tell me little things, but she never told me that when she was gone and I inherited the pictures and everything, she had a picture, was my great-grandfather, was Yip Yellow Dog, and she asked me one day, Helen, do you know who this is? And I, sure, that's Grandpa Harper. She says, which Grandpa? And I said, Grandpa Dave. She says, no, that's his dad. That's Yip Yellow Dog. And that's how I found it. And then I just, oh my goodness, I just got to get into this. But really, that was the beginning. And of course, my aunt had saved the tintype of the Gomer, Sarah Gomer, and I still have that tintype.
Wow. You have a picture of her husband?
Yes, I do, in his military uniform.
Wonderful. You think of any other questions?
I had one because I loved the story about, and I thought that was so fascinating about your grandfather having the Underground Railroad house, and I don't know if you could talk more about that, and then exploring it as a child. I think that's a really powerful story. I don't know if you could start that a little bit more.
The Underground Railroad that was in the Gomer home was within sight of where I lived, and my father didn't tell me, but my mother did. She was always giving me bits of information, and she said, well, you know that was on the Underground Railroad, and I said, no, I didn't know that. And she says, you go down to the basement, And I suppose I was about 12, with an inquisitive mind. And she said, you go down there and there's a panel on the wall and you have to slide this back. I don't think she ever saw it, but I guess my dad had told her. And of course, I wanted to go exploring. And she said, don't tell Daddy now. And but I did get into the basement, but that's far. Helen Marie, what are you doing down there? I says, oh, I'm just looking around. And it was built on big sandstone. That area is full of clay and that type of thing. And but I explored the upstairs. I went in every room, and the girls that was there, they were teenagers, and here I was about 6, and I would follow them all over, just trying to, and they used to go into the back room, which was a parlor, and they tap dance. They said, don't tell Grandma Gomer now. And it was something they could really, and the one girl still lives in Columbus.
Would this have been your aunt?
That was their grandmother, and that would have been their mother. Well, we had the same great-grandfather.
So did the house have an attic?
It had, yes, and it didn't have what you call an upstairs. It had an attic, but you could walk around up in there. And there's where I found the spinning wheel, they used to sit and spin. And they also had an old bicycle. And they had a bicycle in the Norman place too, but I didn't get to play with it. It had one of those big wheels in the front, and it had 2 smaller wheels in the back, like a tricycle, but it was a bicycle. It was real high. I just thought that was fascinating. And then they had the spinning wheel, and they used to actually spin wool, because my father, we raised sheep and cattle and ducks and chickens and everything there. And he used to shear sheep. And I was 5. He and the men would be in there just shearing sheep. He says, now you stay in the house with your mother. So I go out in the barn, nosy, and I step on a rusty nail.
Oh, no.
So what do? He carries me back to the house, takes a piece of sheep wool, lights it, and holds my foot over it. So he said, now you learn. So what did I do? I go back out the next day and run another nail on the other foot. So they did it all again. They didn't use fat meat or anything like the old people did. They set that wool on fire, and I never had lockjaw. I was grown before I ever had a lockjaw shot. There are just so many things that we used to do, and we just roamed all over. We would get on we had mine ponies that were bigger than the regular Shetlands, and we'd get on them and we'd ride up in the woods, and there was deer moss up there. There's deer on the farm, wild turkey, and we'd never get lost. And there is an Indian mound up on the Gomer place. And my cousin told me that when she was a little girl, there used to be on top of it an arrowhead with a yellow feather. I don't know, but we figured that he must have at one time been a chieftain.
Can you talk about just the Lett connection with your family? How did you connect to the Lett family? What's the connection?
The connection to the Lett family sort of goes like, I got a information they were having one, and I should go to it. Well, on my mother's side, that was 4 years ago, and I've been to all of them now. My mother's grandmother was Joanna Lett. She was born Joanna Lett, and she married a Morgan. So there's where I started out with the Letts. Then I find out that I'm also a descendant of Jemima Lett, I think, of the original group, and also Aquila Lett, Aquila B. Lett. I'm a descendant of his, so it comes down through the family like that, and I have it documented.